These are stories of outdoor adventure and expert advice from folks with calloused hands. I'm James Nash, and this is the Six Ranch Podcast. This episode of the Six Ranch Podcast is brought to you by Defend Security Cameras. Mr. Leland Brown, thank you, sir, for being here. I'm excited to hear about your research, which has been ongoing for quite a while now. When did this project start?
Well, in my head, it started like a decade plus ago. But
Really?
So when I used to do invasive species management, one of my pet peeves was we would say we're using best available science, but there was very little research on terminal performance of hunting ammunition. So when we'd be shooting pigs and goats and all these other species, we'd say, oh, well, we're using all the best available science. But then you say, well, why'd you choose that bullet? And we couldn't point to anything. So one of the reasons I came to Oregon when I was hired at the Oregon Zoo was they said that they could get me into a graduate program so I could conduct some of this research work that I wanted to do. That only took me 9 years to actually figure out. So like I started maybe 8 years, something like that. I started at Portland State University in the graduate program in 23, I think. And now it's 26.
It's probably a bit of a surprise for people to hear that the Oregon Zoo is interested in terminal ballistic performance of different types of projectiles.
Yeah, well, I can't say that the Oregon Zoo specifically is, but I sure as hell am. So, but, it's interesting because, zoos have shifted from this place to go see animals to kind of these conservation organizations. And one of the conservation programs at the Oregon Zoo is this lead-free program where we're helping people access and use lead-free ammo to reduce unintended consequences for raptors like bald and golden eagles and California condor. And so that's kind of where all that comes from, why the zoo's involved. My side is from, as an invasive species biologist, I cared about how well we're killing stuff. And so my whole input into this whole system of like ammunition choice and all of that is, how do we find ammo that works really well and also reduces these unintended consequences?
Yeah. It's so whenever we're talking about ballistics, it's in three categories, right? So we've got internal ballistics. That's everything from when the primer gets ignited until when the bullet leaves the barrel. Most people don't really think about it. Reloaders do a little bit, but that's mostly like an actual like rocket science engineering type of issue, right? Most people get really interested in external ballistics. So everything between when that projectile leaves the end of the barrel and when it hits the target.
Yeah, all your drop charts and wind drift and all that stuff is what people think about when they think of ballistics.
Yeah, and that stuff is really fun, and I love it. I was doing it earlier today. I was having a wonderful time trying to make a guess at how all these atmospheric conditions are going to change where my bullet lands, right? What are all the air molecules doing between here and there, and how do they affect this projectile? It's very, very fun. What gets really slept on, though, is terminal ballistics, terminal performance. So what happens with that projectile once it hits the target? And if the target, in the case of hunters or invasive species control specialists, whatever, if you're shooting a critter, you want to know what is going to happen to that animal because of that projectile hitting it. And it changes so much from one diameter of a bullet, one shape of a bullet, what the bullet is made out of, how fast it's going. There's a huge number of things that go into it. And it is the most important thing to me. It's the most important thing. Shot placement, critically important, but anybody who's hunted for very long at all knows that shot placement doesn't always work out, and we want to have good terminal performance with that projectile, whether the shot placement is perfect or not.
Yeah.
So what are some things that have surprised you that you've learned?
Well, I mean, it's been interesting. So the way that I implemented this is here's one of the challenges, right? Everyone has an opinion on what's the best bullet because they've used it and it has been effective for them. But our sample sizes generally are pretty small, right?
Very
I
small.
mean, even myself, I've shot a lot of animals in my lifetime, but even that, if you look at the variance across each of those individual shots, they're not necessarily comparable easily to one another. So, in order to compare across the board, you have to get to really high sample sizes to account for all the variability. So, what I did was ask hunters in Oregon and then kind of from a larger area as well and some other states and just some general kind of like, hey, tell your friends about this, invite them in, is to record all this information about the cartridge they're using, the ammo they're using, the animal they're shooting, how far they shot, all those circumstances you shoot an animal in, and then track how far the animal ran after you hit it with your first shot. How many times you shot it, what the first shot impact location was, where the bullet stopped in comparison to that first shot impact location. So that gets you your angle of penetration. And then look at all of that and try to calculate out what are the actual really critical factors in predicting how far an animal is going to run. Because if you think about how we talk about hunting, we are tracking performance in the way we tell our hunting stories, right? We say, I shot that elk at 200 yards and it ran 50 and dropped. That's a measure of performance. That running 50 yards is a measure of performance. It's how long it took for that animal to become incapacitated. So we can use that as our measure of performance in other places. We can also look at, okay, was the animal still alive when you got up to it? Does that become one of those measures, right? Yes, it became incapacitated. It could no longer run, but was it still moving, right? So the way I think about this, and I've gotten off onto what I learned, but I think we need the stage set a little bit, is when people talk about animal welfare, hunters get nervous, right? Animal welfare is kind of like a weird term for us to use. But when we talk about humane and quickly killing an animal, that's animal welfare, right? Animal welfare is reducing suffering for that individual animal. And that's what we care about as hunters for multiple reasons. One, none of us like to watch an animal suffer or run away wounded. And two, we want to recover it and come back with all the meat and, all the resources that we benefit from going hunting. And so from a scientific standpoint, what we're looking at is all animal welfare. So the interesting thing so far is that I've asked hunters to submit all this data. I've categorized bullets kind of into 5 types. And I think this is kind of the first time this has been done. I don't know of any other research that's done this, but there's your classic cup and core bullet, so something like a Remington core locked. There's a weight retention bullet, something like a Nosler partition or an Accubon, something that's designed to hold weight a little bit more. Your kind of long range design of bullet, maybe like the ELDX or your Burger style or something that maybe is slightly higher BC, intended to shoot at slightly longer distances. Your deforming lead-free bullets, something like a Barnes, triple shock, Nosler E-tip, one of those, or your fragmenting lead-free bullets. So that's like a hammer bullet or the Lehigh controlled chaos, something like that. And then I tried to look across all those designs. If we include those as one of the factors, is there any difference? Do one of those predict the likelihood of, reduced flight distances or more likely to have an animal drop in its tracks? And I've been a little bit surprised in the fact that the bullet design doesn't seem to have any significant effect, right? Which is counter to what you'd usually hear in hunting camp, right? Because someone will say, oh, you have to shoot X bullet because it's weight retention, because you'll get the penetration, all those pieces. So realistically, it seems like across the board, the bullet type itself, so far in my initial analysis, hasn't really made a big difference. There's a few things that have, right? The number of shots that you take means you're less likely to have an animal drop in its tracks. Well, that makes sense. If something's running, you're going to shoot it more, right? It's somewhat similar. Hitting central nervous system means something's not going to run, right? So those are kind of somewhat expected, but those are really the significant factors that have come out of some of this initial modeling work that I've done.
What's your sample size right now?
Right now, if I use complete samples, it's about 650. If I do some imputation, which is to kind of calculate out some predicted information for missing data, I can get that sample size up to like 11,000. And I need to do some work to compare those two to see if the imputation is accurate enough for me to be able to do that. It's always a big problem with some of this kind of community data is that people just don't fill out all the information sometimes. But even at 650, I think if I look at for each bullet type, we're well over 100 plus samples for each bullet type. I think it's like 150 or so for each bullet type for harvest.
I'm so excited right now to continue talking about this.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
If you would have asked me, if you would have given me these categories and asked me which of these has the shortest distance between the shot impact and that animal stopping, I would have said weight retention bullet, right?
Yeah.
Now, I have an emotional reaction to that. That's coming from an emotional place because I've had a huge amount of success with that type of bullet, and I've experienced some failures with some of these other types of bullets.
Yeah.
So I'm not coming at that from a 650 data point. Realistically, probably closer to 250 to 300 big game animals is what I've seen killed by bullets, with all kinds of different results, right? And that all gets muddied up in the memory world because I'm not actually filling stuff out and writing stuff down. This is very, very interesting. So you didn't find a noticeable difference so far between bullet types. You've got 20 acres and your security camera can see about 50 feet from your Wi-Fi router. Your gate, your barn, your equipment, all the places you actually need to monitor, they're exactly where your Wi-Fi doesn't reach. That's where Defend security cameras make a lot of sense. They work on cellular, just like your phone. But here's what's clever. They've got an embedded SIM card that automatically connects to the best network in your area. Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile. It finds whatever's strongest. No choosing providers, no contracts, no hassle. I'm using Defend cameras at my place. You mount it, open the Defend app on your phone, and you're done. 10 minutes. Clear footage, night vision, instant alerts, and here's something you need to know. Defend doesn't sell your data. Not to China, not to tech companies, not to anyone. They work for you, period. Defend your place. What are some things that did show a difference?
Well, as you would expect, shot placement seems to really matter.
Okay.
Right. So we measured. So what I had people fill out is on a basically a diagram of a animal to mark where their first bullet impacted. So, and I had both sides. So it's interesting. If you look at the data, there's these double curves because they've either filled it on the broadside of one side or broadside of the other where that first bullet impacted. Bullets that tend to impact towards the vital area seem to matter, right? If they're hitting in those vital organs, then an animal's not going to run as far. Those really seem to be critical to it. The requirement for a coup de grace, right? This makes sense, right? If you have to shoot something after the fact, or you get up to it, but it dies on its own. If you don't have to shoot it again, that seems to have an influence on how far an animal is going to run, right? That means you put a good first shot on it and probably bled out fairly well, which I think is another piece we probably need, because if you talk about terminal performance, I think people have a misunderstanding about how we kill animals with rifles sometimes.
Yeah,
There's like
let's talk about it.
there's this idea that like we just shoot something and we've created enough and we just like knock it flat and that's what kills it. But we kill things because we bleed them out, right? Same as we do with an arrow. It's just we have a very efficient way of doing it with a high-powered rifle because we get this cavitation wound, which stretches tissue, tears an area of tissue that's much larger than the diameter of the bullet, and we drain blood out of those blood-bearing tissues. So if you lose approximately 30% of your blood volume, that is what creates incapacitation. That means there's not enough blood pressure to get blood into the brain, and the animal can't move anymore, and then dies probably fairly soon after that. But people will be on this impression that, oh, if I just shoot something like a big enough rifle, I'll just knock it on its, you hear the stories, oh, I knocked it off its feet, right? And it just shocked it to death. You may have knocked it off its feet, and you may have shocked it, and it went maybe unconscious because pressure wave impacted all those organs. But while it's unconscious, what actually killed it is it bled out. Or you hit central nervous system, and you shut down the central nervous system. That's kind of how we kill stuff.
I fully agree with you on this. I don't know if folks out there are like biting the air right now while they're like white knuckle gripping their steering wheel because they don't believe this, but I'm on board with this, and I firmly believe that these animals are dying after they become unconscious, right? And unless you shoot them in the brain, yeah. But if we're talking about chest wounds, stuff like that, they're going to pass out and they're going to die unconscious. And from a hunter's perspective, that's a good case scenario, right? Yeah. We're killing something.
Ideal.
We need to acknowledge that. But we also need to limit suffering as much as we can. We need to be careful about what we think suffering is, and not anthropomorphize it, right?
Sure.
That's also very important. But God, have you read Michael Pollan's new book on consciousness?
I have not, and I'll be honest that my current reading schedule is severely limited.
Yeah.
So,
dude, it's pretty wild. Yeah, I don't know if I would even recommend it. It's very interesting, but you're gonna potentially feel bad about eating a green bean by the time you're done with it.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting. So we've got to be careful about anthropomorphizing animals, which just means like putting human values on stuff. Mm-hmm. If we don't want to take our emotions and our feelings, like the way that I would imagine suffering is not the experience that an elk is going to have after it's been shot. These are different things. But I don't want to have that animal alive for a single second longer than it absolutely has to be from the moment that bullet hits it to the moment it dies. I want to reduce that amount of time as much as possible. Also, I need to like measure some real factors, right? If I wanted to reduce that time as much as possible, I would only shoot animals in the brain. But that's a really small target, right? So I need to provide for the real world and some margin for error. So I'm going to go to the next best thing. Something I've been talking with people about quite a bit lately, Leland, is shot placement for the sake of meat quality.
Yeah.
And this is something that I rarely hear anyone talk about unless they're a butcher who does custom cutting and kills farm animals, right? They're going to go up and they're going to head shoot that animal in a pen and then immediately go and cut open its chest so that it can get the blood out of its system. Hunters oftentimes have a disadvantage in distance where they're not able to do that, and that blood is going to stay in that body. What I'm really working towards is aorta shots. I want to shoot through both lungs and through the aorta so that the heart can keep pumping and draw blood out of the pulmonary, get all that blood out of the animal's system, but not be able to circulate any new blood that has a bunch of hormones and epinephrine and all that stuff thrown into the mix.
Yeah, I mean, it's curious because, one of the reasons we don't as hunters, we don't, you don't necessarily need to go up and bleed an animal after you've shot it, is because you've damaged all that blood. Like, you have created a lot of bleeding, right? If you open up that thoracic cavity, it's full of blood. But like you said, if you shoot the heart and you destroy that pump, and we often see flight distances, and that's one of the things I'd like to look at through this data, is I asked people to look at what organs were actually damaged. And that's always a little risky with the public, but you can tell if you hit double lung or the heart. That's pretty easy to figure out. People know what those organs are. It'd be interesting to look at some of these organ impacts from the first shot and compare to how far animals end up running. Because what I've seen with animals that are heart shot is they will often run further than I expect.
And quite fast too.
And quite fast, yeah.
Because what we're really doing, like, yes, the animal's bleeding to death, but more than anything, we're preventing oxygen from getting to the brain.
Right. Which is the whole point of that reducing blood volume, right?
Yeah.
Like, we're shutting down the central nervous system. We're just doing it over that period of time because we're reduced blood volume. You're doing the same thing with a central nervous system hit, where you shut down nerve signals or the brain itself and damage the brain itself. But it's going to be faster than draining that blood out, because our damaged area is going to be fairly similar across bullet types. And I've done some of this work. We do a fair amount of ballistic gel testing day to day, and wound channel sizes are often pretty similar. Like, they're not, like, you shoot a bigger caliber, it's often going slightly slower. You're not ending up with triple the size of the wound channel often. Sometimes they're bigger, but the return on investment of that varies a little bit. It's not, I think it's more of a curve than it is a straight line, right? Yep. Like, you switch from a 6.5 Creedmoor to a 30-06, it's not immediately double the size, anything like that.
375 H&H is a great example of this, right? I thought of that as this giant hamburger creating cartridge as a kid. The first time that I went to Africa, that's what I was shooting, and I was like, these look like shotgun slug wounds. Like, they're
because it's velocity dependent, right?
It's
so
slow.
That cavitation is what creates that bigger wound channel. But if you start slowing that down, so if you look at some of the old writings of like Elmer Keith and like Jack O'Connor, they were having this argument back then about, large, slow bullets or, fast and light bullets. And nowadays, I think we are in kind of the golden age of technology, is that we can have the best of both. You can have a fast shooting, flat, light bullet that holds its weight really well, that penetrates deeply, which is one of the big benefits of that slower, heavier bullet. But at the same time, you're going to be balancing some of that out, right? You're going to be driving expansion. Your cavitation wound's going to be larger. There'll also be greater resistance, right? It's Newton's first law for, equal and opposite reaction to any energy. So you're going to see some resistance on the back end of that as well. So it's really just like there's no such thing as a magic bullet or a magic cartridge. We're always looking at sacrificing a little bit here to gain a little bit there. Like, it's all this seesaw of performance. And that's really one of the interesting things looking at all of this, is what actually creates the impacts that we're looking for. How do we kill the animals as efficiently as possible? How do we find the bullets that will work the way we want without creating any of these, unintended consequences, right? And also the other side of this is, if I'm selecting a bullet, does that bullet provide me the most flexibility across the most opportunities that are provided to me? So, this has been a curious thing, and I'm hoping to dig into this a little bit more in the data to look at some of this. But if you're using a lighter constructed bullet that's more likely to come apart and reduce penetration, does that create additional risk of poor performance in different shot presentations compared to something like that weight retention bullet, right? Does that angle of the wound, of the angle of shot presentation, really start to matter in some of those cases? And we have to back out a little bit and get into that in some of this data. I'm hoping that we can. I'm not certain that I have the sample size to get to that, because most of these are kind of broadside, less than 45 degrees, as we usually try to with our hunting shots, right? We're not trying to take those steep quartering shots for the most part, because they are less effective. They increase risk.
Yeah. Something that I'm constantly battling is some old school ideas about shot placement and shot angle.
Yeah.
And I'll die on this hill. The best shot angle is perfectly broadside. Period.
Yeah.
And I continue to hear people say, well, actually quartering away is better. It patently is not. And I think that mediastinum is absolutely critical, and it's never more available than perfectly broadside. Mediastinum is what separates the two lobes of the lungs and encapsulates all of the cardio, all that stuff.
The whole aortic arch area, all right there. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think with archery in particular, a lot of what we've contributed to a really quick kill from a double lung shot is actually a collapse of the mediastinum. And
I agree completely.
Broadside is the way.
Yeah.
Part of the reason that we're having this conversation, Leland, because originally I was pretty resistant to this idea, because I want to continue to have lead as an option for some types of hunting. I don't want to see any regulation that takes that away. And when I first heard about ideas of reintroducing California condor to Oregon, I thought, oh man, they're doing this so that they can take lead bullets away from us. I know now that that's not where you're coming from. But part of the reason that I wanted to talk with you about this, of many reasons, is last year I was guiding a hunter who was shooting a brass projectile from G9, and their long range hunter bullet. It was a 300 Win Mag. It was a 155 grain bullet that was doing 3,400 feet per second out of a 20-inch barrel. And she shot a cow elk at 400 yards, and the elk dropped off of its feet when the shot hit it. And that typically, as a guide, makes me nervous, because it makes me think that it could be a spine shot. A lot of times animals get up from that shot and you never see them again. Yep. But when she hit, both of her ears dropped as well. And then her head went to the ground. She passed out, and that elk didn't move again. I thought, wow, that was perfect. That's incredible. Then when I butchered that animal, I had less meat damage from that projectile than I'd ever seen before. It's like, how could this happen? So here's a non-toxic projectile that absolutely pickled this elk and didn't cause a bunch of, like, what we would maybe refer to as hydrostatic shock, that jellied up meat nonsense where you can't eat it anymore. We didn't have very much of that. I was amazed, and I thought, there's something here that I have been discrediting, and I need to learn more about it. And you're the guy that's been researching it. Yeah. So there are no magic bullets, but surely in 650 samples, there's got to be one that's rising slightly closer to the top, right?
I mean, maybe, but the way that I'm doing this research is I'm not distinguishing individual bullet models at this point, because I think that gets us in trouble, because you're not getting to sample sizes for an individual bullet type across. So what I would have to do in order to do that, and this is where I think we have to be really careful with some of this research, is the ideal way to do this. Let's talk about the ideal research project. Was I would set up a bunch of people with the exact same cartridge, with the exact same bullet, and we would go out and shoot animals in the exact same presentation at the exact same ranges across a whole suite of ranges, and then compare performance across all of those. And then we would repeat that with each of the new types of bullets across that same cartridge. And then we would do it again with the next cartridge and the next bullet type, but you're never going to be able to do that, right? It's not logistically possible.
And the only way to have that many controls on an animal would have to be something that's borderline a clone, like domestic
Yeah.
pigs, something like that.
Yeah, it's not really a feasible kind of like field research project. You could do other things like they've done in other places and look at, controlled settings on carcasses and look at, they've done this looking at fragmentation rates in sheep carcasses as a surrogate for deer. And they set them up at a standardized distance and shoot them and then do all this work. But it's not reflective of reality in the field, which is, hey, we've got all these different variables that are inputting into this system and what's driving that. So I try to be really cautious about this, and that I'm not comparing individual bullet themselves, bullet models. Because I'm not sure that we'll ever get to that where we can just say like this bullet's going to be better. Maybe over a very long period of time if we can build this data set out and get, these samples over time. But even if I could use the full data set that was submitted without none of it had missing data, and I could use the full 1,500 samples or something that were submitted and they were all complete samples and all perfect, I still don't think we would have the sample size for looking at individual bullet models to say we can predict that this bullet model is going to outperform. We would have to get up into the 15 or 20,000. Given the number of bullet types that are out there and across all those different cartridges, we would have to be looking at a huge sample size for that, which I'd love to do over the long term. But
Yeah, we can do that.
yeah,
we can do
sure,
that.
it'll be super easy. It'll only take like 20 years or something. Unless we can get a bunch of people curious and participating.
Well, yeah, we can do that too, but I don't think North America is the place. We don't
No.
have the volume,
No,
right?
probably not.
This could be much, much better done in Africa.
I mean, if we look at total harvest rates across North America, if we just say deer, for example, we could potentially do this if we could get interest from all the deer hunters in North America to participate in a study. You could theoretically get to there. You've got however many thousands of deer hunters just in Oregon, and you multiply that across 50 states, you could get a pretty good sample size, but you'd really have to get a lot of interest from people to be part of something like that.
Where I think Africa might be the move is that you get a bottleneck of the number of individuals that you have to deal with because everybody's going out with a guide for the most part. So you're just going to be talking to your PHs, whereas with this North American model, you have to talk to each individual, and then you've got some looser factors as well as that like emotional confirmation bias stuff that comes along with retelling a hunting story. Whenever I talk to my clients, I might have here's a situation. They're in a tree stand. They hit me up on the inReach. They said, I just shot a bull. Like, cool. Hang tight. I'm going to be there in 30 minutes.
Right.
Sneak up to the stand, and then comes like the interview, which is followed by CSI.
Right.
And,
yeah.
And I say, okay, where was he standing? And at this point, I've gotten 180 degrees wrong from reality before.
Oh yeah.
These are from really smart people who are 100, like could not be closer to wrong if they tried. They were completely perfectly wrong. And okay, so we start with that. I still want to
witness reports are notoriously flawed, right?
so bad. And then I say, okay, which way was he facing? Almost nobody can get that right.
Yeah.
What was he broadside? This is always a yes, right? And then when we recover that animal and I'm skinning it later and I have this entry hole here and this exit hole here, I'm like, you sure he was broadside? Because look at this. And they're like, oh my gosh, did the arrow curve? Like, no, it did not.
Not like, no. And, I mean, bullets do weird things sometimes, but it's rare. It's rare that they curve like that. Yeah. On occasion, some weird stuff happens, but
and arrows can a little bit too.
Yeah.
But the point is, we're very, very bad first person witnesses. So I think having that PH fill that out where he could care less, he just wants the truth, and he's going to write down, the shot placement and the shot angle. Hunters also tend to think about shot placement from that two-dimensional standpoint.
True.
and they have a really hard time with shot angle, which is,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
I have the hardest time explaining it.
Yeah, which is where you really need to get. I mean, and this is what the request is put your point of impact and then put where you recovered or the exit wound was, right? Like I don't want you thinking about what the angle was. I just want you to mark the two spots where there's a hole or the bullet was found. That's it. But I agree, like consistency of data collection using PHs or guides in North America or whoever, someone's that going to do the same thing over and over and over. Your response rates will probably be higher, and the actual data you'll get out of that would probably be quite a bit better.
What kind of participation have you had from ammunition manufacturers?
Oh, I mean, we talk with ammunition manufacturers fairly consistently through the partnership work, through the lead-free work, but not really any through this research project. So one of the things that we've done some interesting work looking at where people get their information about ammunition and some other things as separate from this research. But ammunition manufacturers, hunters really don't put a lot of faith in the information that they get from manufacturers. At least in Oregon, they don't seem to. They're relying on other sources of information rather than marketing from the manufacturers.
What are those sources of information that they're relying on?
A lot of them is, from their peers, from forums and things like that. So if they're looking for information about how different bullets work, some from like the departments, from guides, things like that. But really a lot of the online stuff now is where people are going to look for information on performance. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is the last place that I'll look for information.
Yeah. I mean, I use forums sometimes to look at, but you have to be really careful of what you're looking at, right? Because if you look on some of those forums, some of them have some really good information. But the problem is you have to have enough knowledge to be able to differentiate some of the good information from some of the bad information. And that's really hard for most people, especially if you're not spending a significant amount of your time thinking and looking at bullet performance. It's easy to just get into like they said that was a good bullet, so here we go.
And how difficult is it when you're weeding through that and trying to say, is this good or bad? It's really easy to just say, well, this is good because I agree with it. This supports the opinion that I already have. That confirmation bias.
Exactly.
That's really tough. Really tough. A lot of print stuff it is also pretty problematic. When I was writing articles, it became very apparent to me that the only way that I could make money doing it was by making that money from whichever brand I was going to be writing about.
Product placement sort of stuff, right?
Yeah. Because I was making like $250 or $300 for an article that was taking me weeks of work to produce.
Yeah. Yeah, which, and I look at some of those articles, like a new bullet will come out and there'll be an article about this new bullet and they'll be like, oh, I went out and I shot an animal and it worked. The animal died. Like, okay, well, that's not really a test of how well that bullet works.
Yeah.
It's great that it worked. And I do think manufacturers are making quality products that work pretty well as a general rule. But a lot of their testing is not publicly available, right? That's internal. Very little of it is in the peer-reviewed literature where someone else could replicate that kind of effort, which is really what I was trying to do with this. This isn't like, this work is not going to be the end-all be-all of, here we've told you exactly how bullets are working. It is more of a starting place than anything for us. There's a little bit of work out of Europe, like Scandinavia. There's a little, and Germany. There's some work out of Australia that's looked at some bullet performance stuff. There's a little bit in North America, Theodore Roosevelt National Park, when they're doing some of those elk calls. Mike McTee out of MPG Ranch has done some kind of performance-based work, but most of them are really restricted. They're restricted to single species. They're restricted to comparing bullet material and not design. And that's really where I wanted to to differentiate is because when we talk about bullets, we don't just talk about material. We talk about the construction and what it's designed to do, and then we're looking at that as a predictor of performance. So that's where I wanted to go with this work, is really looking at those different designs and seeing if there was variation. So from a big overarching, we're not seeing that. Now what I need to do is dig in and look internal for each one of those designs. Is there different factors that predict performance? And it started as a really big data set, and there's a ton of data cleaning you need to do for community data like this, right? Because everyone, you try to control how people enter information, and then they say other, and they put some random thing that's already, ideally they select from a drop-down list so it's consistent. But, invariably you get a bunch of people say, oh, that's not a 30-06 Springfield, it's a 30-06, but my rifle's a Remington, so I'm going to put that in. And so you got to go clean all that up and make it all legible before you can compare it all.
So are you at a point where you can draw any conclusions at all?
So I've done some kind of like very early preliminary analysis, and like basically those conclusions that I shared already are that, the bullet design really doesn't seem to make a big difference. There are some differences, like what predicts performance at, say, so I use something called a hurdle model, because a lot of our responses are this animal only didn't run at all, right? Which is the goal. But if you use a standard statistic model on that, it screws it all up, because a whole ton of zeros is super skewed. So you have to differentiate between those two. So there's some predicting factors for zero flight distance, and there's some predicting factors for how far something's going, if it's going to run, what predicts how far it's going to run. So I can look at some of that stuff. And then we can do some kind of per MANOVA work, which really looks at predicting difference between different categories. So if I look at across those different bullet types, is there a difference between any one individual group of those? Like, is a lead cupping core, is there a difference between that and the lead weight retention, or the lead long range, or the lead free deforming bullet? And right now, what we can say is that there's no significant difference between any of those types.
Wow.
I'm hoping to have this written up and into publication this year. That's the goal. But
cool.
Per usual, there's lots of competing needs right now. So what I should be doing and what I want to be doing, or what I am doing, are not necessarily always the same thing.
It's always a battle. I'll be curious to see kind of what the graph looks like on recovery distances as well.
Yeah.
In the last, I think I've probably guided around 150 to 200 elk that have been killed by arrows. And I know we're talking about bullets, but I'll talk about arrows here briefly. If it's a double lung shot that hits mediastinum, and not all double lung shots do. If you hit the little lobes in the backs of the lungs, you can get lung, diaphragm, lung. And that animal can go, a good 300 yards. Yep. If it's double lung and mediastinum, it's going to be dead in less than 150 yards, period. Usually between 30 and 45 seconds, the animal's off of its feet. So we have about 100% recovery of those. I will say it's 100% recovery. From the next stage is my 150 yard to 400 yard elk. And there's a minority that are those little lobe double lung shots. The majority are single lung that are shot at too much of an angle. And those single lung animals almost universally die within 30 yards of that quarter mile mark. They're going to be between 400 and 440 yards. They're going to be in that zone. And it usually takes around 5 hours for that animal to die. 4 to 5 hours is what I'm finding. If it goes beyond a quarter mile, which is typically like that liver or gut shot or miscellaneous, some other part of the animal. My recovery rates drop down to less than 10% on those animals. So 150 yards, 100% recovery. Between 150 and 400 yards, we're probably going to be in that 50% recovery rate. And then beyond that, we're less than 10%. So I think you'll end up running into a number for your flight distance that really tapers off, and you just don't see anything beyond that. And I'll be curious to see what that ends up being for, these massive data points.
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things that I've been looking at is kind of this probability of that instant drop, right? Because this becomes the standard goal. And I don't know, and the problem with a lot of this data is like you need to work your way down through. So I'm working on kind of the big general stuff right now and then trying to get down into those really high detailed pieces. But I don't know that I'll have the sample sizes for that really detailed analysis.
Eventually,
if we can continue to gather data, but not at this point, I don't think.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I did look at, and because one of the things I'm really curious about is this increased interest in long range shooting and the risk that's associated with that, right? Because when I think about terminal performance, velocity is the driver of wound channels, right? Bullets are designed to upset at certain velocities. And so that's what drives the cavitation, having that big frontal flat area that pushes tissue aside, creates the shock wave that actually tears tissue. So the further out you go, the slower the bullet's going, the more reduced that wound channel is going to be, till you get to the point where you're really looking at exclusively crush damage, which is that mechanical interaction of the projectile and the tissue. So looking at some of this stuff, one of the things that we looked at is across these different designs, is there a difference? And there's not a ton, but your success rate, like probability of zero flight, is approximately 15 to 20% up close, and then slowly, very slightly declines going down.
What do you call close?
Out to like 200 yards. A very slight decline. We're talking like a percentage or two decline in probability. But your confidence intervals go way up at those distances. The further out you are, the bigger that range of probability is. So you've got, much more variability in performance out at those longer ranges.
It's worth pointing out that confidence interval going up does not mean that you have more confidence.
No.
Yes.
No.
That's what it sounds like.
Yeah.
To normal people who are not scientists.
No,
yeah.
It just means that there's more variability in what can happen, right?
Yeah.
It can go either direction, and we can't predict it as well. That's all.
Yeah.
And so that's an interesting piece.
Are you looking at velocity at the target?
So I can't necessarily, because velocity is so variable, right? Velocity will change. If I have the exact same box of ammo and I put it in one rifle and the next, velocity changes a little bit. And so I didn't ask people to report their muzzle velocity, because a lot of people have zero idea what their muzzle velocities are. I could make some estimates, but I'm a little hesitant to do that. Just because I think it's a little bit too much supposition on my part about what that velocity actually is. But we can use range. If we use range across that, then that gives us somewhat of an idea. And now again, cartridge dependent, all those pieces.
If they're shooting factory ammo, which most people are, if they give you their barrel length, you're going to be able to get within 50 feet per second.
maybe, but I've seen even variability within one rifle with factory ammo of over 50 feet per second. Now,
Yeah.
ammo manufacturers are getting better at that. But
And
out
they,
at range, that starts
yeah.
to change quite a bit, right? And so I've gone back and forth about whether or not that's something that's worthwhile doing. Um,
Oh, I think so. I think it's critical. I think it's critical because the number that I want to know is if I want this zero flight distance, how fast does my projectile need to be going when it gets there? And rangefinders increasingly are providing this information right in the readout, right? If you
Right.
have um, a lot of modern rangefinders do this for you. It shows you your velocity at the target, your remaining energy at the target, which I don't care that much about. I'm very interested in velocity though.
Yeah.
And I would hypothesize that these zero flight distance animals have a remaining velocity of 2,700 feet per second or higher.
Yeah, I'd be curious about that. I agree. I mean, it's an interesting question about how to get to that. I don't 2,700 feet. I'm not 100% convinced on because 2,700 feet for a lot of cartridges is your muzzle velocity.
Right.
Um,
But man, if you're 2,600, 2,400 on the target, it's really tough to just pancake an animal. It's really tough to do it. And I have an 1,800 foot per second red line, so that's my limiting factor in how far I will shoot, regardless of how static the animal is, or how comfortable my position is, or how precise my rifle is. If I'm going below 1,800 feet per second, I'm not going to press the trigger. And there's plenty of bullets that advertise performance at lower velocities than that.
well, they'll advertise expansion, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the difference, right? Is expansion is not equal to damage in the same way. 1,800, you're at least getting some level of cavitation damage. You're getting that pressure wave. It's narrowed for sure. But once you get below that, the amount of cavitation damage that you get is actually, I think, pretty minimal. So you're
Yeah.
really getting whatever diameter your expansion is, that's the amount of damage you're going to get.
Yeah.
And at those velocities, that expansion, although it will initiate upset and expansion, it's going to be minimal. And that's the argument people will have about, something like some of the more heavily constructed bullets that really limit their expansion down to about that 1,800. They say, oh, well, my bullet will expand down to 16 or 15 or whatever. Great. How much damage is it creating at that point? And for me, that's what really matters. So I'm on the same boat. My argument is like 1,800 is the bare minimum, but realistically, I'd rather have 2,000.
Yeah.
Because from a damage perspective, you're going to get at least a little bit more damage there that's creating
Yep.
bleeding tissue. 1,800's like really pretty tight at that point. Like your shot
totally
placement needs
agree
to
with
be
you.
perfect.
I totally agree with
Yeah.
you. Yeah. But like I said, that is my outside limit, and it'll change day to day based on the weather, right? Same gun.
Right.
If I'm shooting through dense air, that distance is going to be a lot closer to me, meaningfully.
Yeah.
A lot of times it might only be 400 yards. Depends on the gun. But if we can start out with a higher velocity and a higher BC, we can hold on to that velocity a lot longer. And
Yeah.
that's part of what I think people are missing when they're completely focused on external ballistics. They're looking at BC for its ability to retain velocity, which helps them a lot with wind, right?
Yeah.
Mostly because it's just spending less time in the wind. Not a huge amount of BC actually changes how much wind drift is actually occurring per meter that bullet travels, but mostly how long is it being affected?
Yeah, it's
by
just
the
not
wind.
slowing down as fast, so it's getting to the target a little quicker.
Right. So I'm trying to get people to think of their maximum shot distances, one in terms of remaining velocity, but also time of flight. Time of flight is huge. So let's let's look at a 0.3 second time of flight as somebody who's, skilled hunter. They can make that shot, right? Doing good. If you're getting up to 0.5 second time of flight, like you need to be a trained marksman. Like you need actual formal training to be taking that shot in the wild. And if you're going to 0.7 second time of flight or beyond, you better be an absolute professional. And the more skill and training I see shooters have, the more they limit the distance that they'll actually shoot in the wild, right? Which is this sort of Socratic conundrum of, the more you know, the more you know.
It's the Dunning-Kruger, right?
Yeah.
If you don't know what you don't know, then you're overconfident. If you know how much you don't know, then your confidence actually declines quite a bit.
Yeah, totally. And there's this huge spike in confidence that happens right after somebody goes through the work of developing a skill. And then that confidence crashes and then goes through little peaks and valleys for the rest of that person's experience level.
Yeah.
It's very interesting, but you never hit the confidence level that you had right after you gained the skill. Like that's as good as you're ever going to feel about it.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. You always think you're like, oh yeah, I shot that and I'm so good, I could do that forever. And then you learn more about how much luck you had in accomplishing all those goals. You're like, oh. And I'm pretty conservative with my shots. Like I really don't take long shots because, like you said, like that flight time, and it's not even like all your flight time. Like you need to understand the influence of the wind and what that bullet's going to do and all of that. But then you've got all these other factors. Like if you got that long flight time, I don't care how good you are. You could always have a perfect shot, but with that flight time, that animal can now take half a step. And now you've gone from a good shot to a bad shot. And so that for me is even more than anything else, is kind of like, if I'm perfect and I can predict the wind, which is hard as hell to do, and I know my drops, which is a lot easier with all the technology we have now, like, can I hit that target if it doesn't move? Sure. Can I predict whether or not that target's going to move? Maybe. Probably, if I've got a good handle on behavior, but not 100%. Probably not even at the 90% confidence that I need. Like if I'm practicing, right, I want 90 to 100% confidence that shot is going to hit where it needs to be.
Yeah.
And I don't know that I have that confidence on animals making decision about whether or not they're going to move over that period.
I had a bear spin out underneath a bullet that was like I want to say it was like 380 or 390 yards. It was 150 grain, 500 BC bullet that was doing 2,900 and change. Good fast bullet, slick bullet. And if it wasn't on video, I wouldn't believed it because it happened during recoil. And I ended up shooting again and hitting the bear and killing it as it was running. I wouldn't have taken that running shot if I'd known I'd missed cleanly the first time. I assumed it was impossible for me to miss this shot because I was so locked on. But from when I pressed to when that bullet got there, that bear had finished drinking out of a creek and spun out and was completely gone, like didn't touch a hair on a 0.3 second time of flight. Like, holy crap.
Unreal.
They're
I'll just say this. Wild animals are better at surviving in the wild than we are, right? Like they can move, they can make those moves as way faster. Like they're just better set up for any of it. So like I'm all about controlling those factors that we can't control and understanding what factors we have that management control over, which is our equipment, our training, and our own ability to hunt, right? I can't control anything other than that. I can't control the weather, the wind, or that animal's behavior. So I control all those other factors to the point where those changes are going to minimize any risk of my failure, which is why I select closer shots, why I, practice more, why I, why when you change any component, you're going back to the range and getting everything figured back out.
I was talking to a sniper buddy of mine yesterday who, is a very, very well-known guy, and he's an incredible shot and an incredible instructor. And we're talking about teaching a hunting school together. And he said that he wanted to teach a long-range portion of it. And I said, just so you know, I'm going to follow that up with a class on how to get closer so you don't have to use any of that stuff.
Right.
And
Perfect.
He's like, awesome. I couldn't agree more. And both of us believe that the correct distance to shoot at an animal leaves powder burns on them.
Yeah.
As close as I can get.
As close as possible.
Yeah, it's how far away I want to be.
Yeah, my whole thing is practice far so that close shot feels easy, right?
True. There's another level to that one as well that I do talk about, which is that occasionally you have to shoot at an animal that's been wounded, and maybe
that's great. Yeah,
maybe your only next and last opportunity is a long shot. Go ahead and have the skills to be able to do that. And it's fun. It's really fun to play around on the range.
Well, like you said with that bear, right? You thought that was an impact first shot and you needed a follow-up. Like, you better be prepared, one, with the technique to take that shot, but two, with the tools to take now a running animal that's probably not in the ideal broadside presentation.
Yeah.
Right. And that's one of my pieces that I'm hoping we could pull out of some of this data is, like, outside of those ideal presentations, if we look at these kind of off outside of broadside, do we then see variation from there? I mean, again, we have to start with this kind of big data set, look at shot angle. Is shot angle an influencing factor? Right now, it doesn't seem to be. But I'd like to look a little closer at a lot of that to see if that variation does exist.
So is this like a paper that people are filling out that's in a stamped envelope, or like what's the format of this?
So I would email, and I'm not taking data anymore is one of the big problems, right? So I completed the data collection last year. I'm like a year into data cleaning and analysis now. But what I did is I sent an email with a PDF form that people could print out and fill out in the field. And it had the basics on it. You know, it had diagrams of the animals that they could mark in the field, all the basic stuff. And then they would get online and fill out basically a survey form to fill out all the data to make it easy. That way no one had to worry about mailing or stamps or any of that stuff. It was as simple as possible. And you could take it on your phone if you had service out in the field.
So you don't want to collect any more data? Because I've got ideas.
I mean, I do, but not for this specific project.
Okay.
I'm very interested in continuing to collect this data in the long term. I would love to hear more of the ideas. I think we would need to rework some of this because I have also some ideas based on how all this went of things we would need to change around, the data forms and all that sort of thing as well.
If we had this like self-addressed stamped envelope with a sheet inside that people could fill out, we could get those out to ammunition manufacturers and they could ship them with hunting ammo.
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons I wanted to use the online platform is if you use a paper version, you end up with a lot of errors, a lot more errors.
More errors.
Right? Because people are writing in everything. And so now you have to not only decipher their writing, but they're writing in a different way of entering every little piece. So you have to re-enter it all. Whereas if you go online and you can get them into kind of some set selections, then you can minimize a lot of that error from just the user entry.
Okay. So maybe it's a QR code.
Use a QR code. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And we use that. We get QR codes and links and everything else. So easy enough. Yeah. But yeah, and I'm curious if you get manufacturers to buy into that. I'd be very interested in that.
I think I can.
Yeah.
I think I can. Because I work with these guys a lot of, because I'm not exclusive with any ammo brand. I shoot a lot of different stuff. And I'm always looking for the next better thing. They are too.
Yeah.
right? These guys are deeply invested
Sure.
in the success of their products. They live and breathe it every single day. They talk about it at lunchtime. They can't get enough of it.
Yeah.
And I think that having some like customer feedback from the wild that could help drive their data to be able to make stuff better and more lethal, I think that they would be very interested in that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's talk about it some more because I am always interested. The more information we can gather to help hunters be more successful, the better off we're gonna be. Right? Like
Yeah.
that's always been my argument. Is like there's no such thing as too much information when it comes to being successful and making sure that we're efficient and taking care of the animals that we hunt, because that's what we're out there for, right? We want to be successful, but we also want to make sure that we're not having outcomes we don't want. That's the goal.
Which scientific journal with an obnoxiously long title and subtitle are you going to publish in?
That's a good question. Right now, my ideal would be something like the Journal of Wildlife Management, right? I mean, this is about how we're managing wildlife, so that's a perfect fit. And I think they've published some of this previous work that's been done out there, so I think it probably would work out fairly well. I just need to get a handle on some of this statistic stuff. One of the big reasons I went back to school is because my stats knowledge is not as good as it probably should be, and here's a way to, one, do this research that I was really interested in, two, improve some skills. So
statistics and probability were the hardest classes I took in college.
Yeah,
I can't say enough bad things about statistics.
Yeah, they're terrible, but they're also really useful. But they're vague, right? I mean, that's the thing, is like they can be really vague. And so trying to, my mind, really like concrete lines to walk down. And statistics don't really do that. It's all a little fuzzy. But trying to be as conscientious about the data you're putting in and making sure that you're not saying something that you can't actually say is the big challenge for me. I really want to be careful with what we're putting out after this. So say like, hey, this is what we can say and this is what we can't say. I don't want to try to like expand this beyond what it actually is.
Man. Well, I'm so excited for this to come out and to get to see your analysis and conclusions.
We haven't even talked about the other side of this, which is like, I'm also doing a bunch of ballistic gel testing and then trying to CT scan to develop 3D models of wound channels that we can then compare into some of this field data and see if there's any predictability. Because that would be the ideal, right? If we could figure out, okay, how do we test and predict a field outcome from a wildlife management side, that would be ideal. Now you still have to validate and do all that other stuff in the field, but you at least have a better idea of like, I'm a little nervous about this bullet for these reasons, and here's the metrics why. Not just, I looked at a wound channel, it looked pretty good, so I guess it'll work. That's been pretty interesting, but the computing power to create those models 3D models is a pain in the ass. So
one of the really tough things about ballistic gel is that it's very difficult to replicate what actually happens at distance. And part of the reason is that we're not good enough shots to be able to actually do this. So, if you want to put up a gel block at 600 yards and guarantee that you're going to hit the middle of that, that's awesome. Can't wait to see that. It's really tough to do. So what a lot of guys do is they just back off their powder charges to try to replicate a velocity at that distance. My biggest issue with that is that you have the same, maybe not quite the same, but pretty close to the same bullet rotation speed at a point blank range ballistic gel test, where that bullet's actually rotating a fair bit slower at distance. And rotation, especially as we've seen with some of these really slow bullets like the A6 Blackout, it matters. It does help with wounding.
Yeah, and I'm curious about that because I initially tried, but if you're shooting across the same cartridge, the same rifle with multiple different bullet types, then getting that precision across all of them becomes a real problem, especially if you're trying to use factory ammo, which was the initial goal, was to use factory available stuff so that we had that, hey, here's on shelf available options. So I'm probably going to end up having to do the reduced powder load because that's really the only option. But the question from there becomes if that reduced powder load, if it's comparable with the field data, right? And I think that's where the difference, at least from my perspective of some of this work is it's not just looking at that wound channel and gel on its own. It's comparing and see if that fits into any prediction using the field data. Can you use it in that way? I agree, though, there's still those problems with it. And I think we just have, to a certain extent, we have to be aware of those problems and we can't overlook them when we're reporting out success. The ideal, if I had the money, would be to buy these blocks and create like a 12 by 12 block that you could shoot into, because that you could get away with, right?
Yeah.
You could do that at 500 yards and be okay. I don't have the money to buy that much ballistic gel, unfortunately, not for the replications that we need to do.
Yeah, you wouldn't probably need a ton of data points though to confirm at distance, right?
No, not a ton, but what I was trying to do is get 3 replicants for each bullet design for that represent that bullet, or bullet model that represents that bullet design. So if you're looking at cup and core, testing 2 different types that are kind of representative. If you're looking at the weight retention style bullets, here's 2 types that are somewhat representative that we could say these are kind of what we expect to see across this design type, which means you need 30 gels. But if you're going to do the 12 by 12, you actually need 4 gels for each test, which means you need 120 gels total, which at 80 whatever dollars a pop or something starts to get really out of reach from a financial side of things. Unless one of those gel manufacturers wants to provide some gels so we can do this research, then we can pull that off.
There's always a way.
Yeah.
Well, it's valuable work, man. I think that it's noble. I'm sure that you run into people who don't understand that this is coming from a place of compassion. And that's one of the hills that hunters are constantly having to climb.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the interesting things about working at a zoo, right? Is they talk to people who are not necessarily, I mean, the Oregon Zoo is interesting in that they did a survey a few years ago of people coming through the zoo. And about 50% of guests at the zoo have some relationship to a hunter. Either they hunt themselves or a family member does, or they have friends who do. So that's actually a pretty high number of people coming through the zoo. But on the other hand, I've sat on zoo grounds with ballistic gels talking to people about hunting, and the lack of information that kind of the general public has about what hunting is and what's required to go hunting. I mean, the fact that you need a license and tags to go hunting is something that people in the general public don't understand. And so my constant mantra around all of this, right, is we can't assume that people know the basics. We have to share the basics with them, and we have to share it with them in a way that they can engage with it, right? It can't be, through like a hunting video where people are watching an animal be shot, because for the general public, that's not a place where they are comfortable getting that information. We have to be giving that information places where people are willing to receive it and think about it and work their way through it, which is one of the, I'll be very honest. I had zero interest, and I've said this a lot over the years. I had zero interest in ever working for a zoo. It was never on my radar. I got into a biology degree because I wanted to be in the woods and avoid talking to people, like many biologists do, right? It's like, great, this will be great. I can go play with animals and no one will bother me. It's not how conservation works, though, right? Conservation works by talking to people about what we can do to further the outcomes for the natural world and for wildlife, and for us as humans as part of that system.
That's why I got out of it.
Yeah.
I saw nothing but spreadsheets in my future. And I was like, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. I'm out.
You do not want to look at my computer screen on a daily basis. It's terrible. There's a lot of spreadsheets. But then I get to go to things where, like, I'm leaving Friday to go to the East Coast to run a workshop on ammo, talking about voluntary options, some of these incentive programs they're running on some of the national wildlife refuges where people can get reimbursed for trying lead-free ammo and testing it out. And that's pretty cool. Like, hunters care about wildlife. They care about wild places. They want to see how things work. So great. Let's talk about all the research that's currently in existence. Hopefully in the next year, I'll be able to add this research into it. And then let's go to the range and let's shoot stuff. Let's shoot ballistic gels. Let's shoot water. Let's look at expansion and fragmentation and damage and talk about how you select a bullet that'll work for you.
Yeah,
I enjoy doing that.
If I can find ammunition that is available, affordable, and more lethal than what can be done with lead, then I'll shoot it.
For sure.
And I'll recommend everybody else does too, right? But if we lose any of those, then it gets really hard for me to support.
Same here. And I wouldn't, like, one of the reasons we started the partnership is that we had to move away from this, like, we're going to force people into a choice, and instead move into, hey, how can we support you to test and find something that meets all of those standards that you just said, right?
Yeah.
That's available, that's accessible, that's affordable, that works really well. The reason I'm still using lead-free ammo is that it's worked really well for me. It's been extremely effective. It performs in a way that I really like. It's predictable, all those various things.
Okay, now's my chance to get an answer out of you.
Please.
What are you shooting?
Well, a rifle, right? So
what bullet?
Depends on the rifle.
Okay.
Right. So my 6.5 Creedmoor right now, I'm shooting the Gorilla loaded Lehigh controlled Chaos.
Okay.
For the 270 that I shot the barrel out of, and I need to replace the barrel on, I was shooting the Barnes TTSX 130 grain. For the 30-06, we do a bunch of the testing with for the work here in Oregon for shooting ballistic gels and things like that. I shoot either like a Barnes 150 grain. I think the Trophy Copper 180 shoots pretty well out of that. And I've shot the 150 grain Power Shot Copper. I shot a bear with that in Vermont last year, and it worked really well. But cool. It's rifle dependent, right? And this is, I think, where people go sideways. They're like, no, I want to shoot this specific bullet. It's like, great, but it shoots like shit out of your rifle. Yeah. Why are you trying to shoot it?
Yeah.
Like, that doesn't make any sense. Find the thing that shoots well out of your rifle that meets your standards, and we can use that. My standards happen to be it expands really well. I like bullets that hold weight, that expand very predictably, and that don't leave lead behind, that has the potential to create an unintended outcome. I want to kill the animal I'm after. I don't want anything else to happen. And I know that if that bullet leaves 25% of its weight behind and I field dress an animal, I'm leaving a pile of food with a substantial amount of that weight loss sitting in it that is now available to other species.
Yep.
That's one of my criteria.
And to us as we eat it, right? Like, that lead really spreads out.
It really does. But, again, I'm a biologist. I'm not a doctor. If you have concerns about that, if you're worried about potential lead exposure for yourself, go talk to your doctor, right? Like, I don't feel comfortable being the one to say, oh, you should or should not be concerned about that. I can tell you how much fragmentation we know occurs, where that potentially could end up based on research that exists. But I'm going to make an assessment of value to that for you, right? Like, that's a personal assessment that you need to make about whether that's a concern that you have.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm not a doctor, but if you give me 2 pieces of venison and you say that one's got a little bit of lead in it and that one doesn't, you only get to eat one. That's a pretty clear choice for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, for my personal choice, that's one of the choices I make, right? Is, hey, if I'm going to have my nieces and nephews come visit and I'm going to feed them a meal, well, I'm very comfortable with that because I know that there's nothing there that I didn't intend to be there.
Yeah.
All it's going to be is the meat from that animal that I harvested.
Well, I've never seen anything perform as well as that brass bullet from G9. I
That
need. I'm
that
gonna
G9's a fragmenting bullet, isn't it? Is
It
it?
is.
Yeah.
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 One of the issues with brass is that it doesn't get along with copper, so you've got to completely copper
Mm.
strip your barrel before you shoot it.
Yeah.
You can switch back to copper, no problem. But most people don't want to clean their rifle barrel all the way, and it's expensive. It's expensive ammunition.
Yeah.
But man, is it crazy. I am going to be playing around with some barn stuff, and seeing how that goes as well. It's such a risky thing for me to say, okay, I'm gonna run this experiment on a living animal where I know my AccuBond just kills the hell out of it, right? That's a tough thing for me to do. But if I can shoot the projectile, I know it's accurate enough. I know that I'm going to kill the animal, right? Because I'm not taking these shots that are marginal. I don't even believe in the concept of marginal. It's binary. Like, I'm either going to kill it or I'm not. That said, I know that shit happens, but yeah, I am going to play around with some of the barn stuff. I've heard it from enough people who I trust that they've experienced success with it that I'm going to give it a try. But very interesting stuff, dude. Very interesting stuff. And it's so cool that you're coming at it from a non-commercial standpoint, because hunters never get to see that. We never get to see that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that was one of the big things for me is like, I look at all the data from all the manufacturers and they're all telling me their bullet's the best thing ever. And many of them are very good, but you really never get a chance to compare across.
Yeah.
And so sure would be nice, right?
Yeah.
So here we are.
I mean, as guides, you get to see a lot more because you're not in control of what your clients bring. So you get to see this much more diverse sample size. But again, we have very few controls over this experiment. It's all anecdotal. Every shot is a little bit different. Every animal is a little bit different.
Yeah.
And then we've got our own emotions tied to it as well.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the big challenges that I see is like people will look at me and say, oh, well, he's involved in that lead-free stuff. I'm like, that's great. If I found out that lead-free bullets didn't work, I would not be telling people to use lead-free bullets, right? Like we can't wound an animal or be more likely to wound an animal and also potentially reduce the risk to another species. That equation doesn't work out. There's other things we could do, right? We can remove the total remains, make sure those aren't available, all those things. But I'm never going to promote a bullet type. And I've done this before. I've had bullets I've tested where I've told people, you should not use that bullet, right? It doesn't expand very well. We're getting very narrow wound channels. Like, I don't have confidence in its success. And there's been both lead bullets and lead-free bullets where I've kind of been like, I don't really like that bullet. There's been some lead bullets that fragment too quick and too often, and I get nervous about people using those because failure of penetration, and you get into that single lung run, right? That animal's going to go forever. Your likelihood of losing an animal is much greater. But I try not to have it based on my kind of like personal like bias, which, we all have our personal biases, but I try to have it as much based on data as we can.
Data drives decisions.
And the other side is, if you don't believe it, here's the big piece. Let's have enough data that if you don't believe what I said, you can replicate it and prove me wrong. Wouldn't that be great, right? Like, don't just tell me that you don't believe it's true. Show me that I'm wrong. And that's the way to go.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. Where can people follow along?
Leadfreepartnership.org, probably. Leadfree_partnership on Instagram. That's where we put most of our stuff out. I'm pretty bad about posting stuff, but if you poke me, I'll probably do more. So feel free to poke.
And when your paper comes out, send it to me, and I'll let the audience know that it's out and they can read it.
Absolutely. Look forward to it. I'll have to talk again.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you for all of your work on it. Excited to see what all the conclusions are.
Thanks, James. Yeah, looking forward to it. I'll see ya.
Bye, everybody. Thank you to everyone who has taken the time out of their busy lives to write a review for the show and share it with their friends. I'm extremely proud of how intelligent, engaged, and adventurous this audience is. Original music for the Six Ranch podcast is written and performed by Justin Hay. Art for the Six Ranch podcast was created by John Chatelain and digitized by Celia Harlander. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again next week.